What if I told you the person who betrayed you just handed you the most powerful weapon you'll ever possess, the weapon to become completely untouchable? Stay with me, because once you see what Carl Jung discovered, betrayal will never scare you again. They thought they broke you. They thought this was the end. But that moment when they lied, when they walked away, when they left you bleeding, wasn't your collapse. You weren't buried, you were planted. Most people believe pain is punishment, but Jung saw something deeper. Your pain wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Betrayal wasn't the end of your story, it was your initiation. Because when someone betrays you, they don't just reveal who they are, they reveal what's hidden inside you. They didn't break you, they revealed your shadow. That shadow, the part you fear, the part you've denied, holds power most people never touch. And once you learn how to face it, everything changes. But here's where 99% of people fail. They react. They chase revenge. And that's why they stay broken. But what if I told you there's a far more dangerous path? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will make you untouchable. When betrayal hits you, it doesn't knock on your door. It detonates inside your life. The trust you built shattered. The person you trusted gone. And suddenly, you're left alone, standing inside the ruins of your own loyalty. Most people stop here. They collapse. They beg. They chase closure that never comes. But you're not here because you want closure. You're here because you want power. Carl Jung saw what most people refuse to face. Betrayal wasn't your destruction, it was your initiation. Because when someone betrays you, they don't just leave you broken, they hand you a mirror. And inside that mirror is the version of you that has been asleep for years. They didn't destroy you. They woke your shadow. The shadow you've spent your life hiding. The anger, the desire, the self-worth you buried to please people who were never worthy. You weren't weak, you were suppressed. Betrayal forced you to confront what comfort always hid. Your pain wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Most people stay stuck in pain because they keep asking, why did this happen to me? But you're about to ask a far more dangerous question. What power inside me did this pain come to awaken? Stay with me, because once you see this, you'll never fear betrayal again. Here's what they never realized. The person they betrayed wasn't your final form. Carl Jung called it the shadow self, the part of you you deny, suppress, and fear. Most people spend their entire lives running from it. But betrayal doesn't give you that luxury. It forces your shadow into the light. When they broke your trust, they pulled the trigger on something ancient inside you, the version of you that's been waiting for a reason to awaken. You weren't ruined, you were activated. That's why they fear you now, not because you're angry, but because you're evolving into someone they can't predict. Someone who doesn't need revenge. Because your evolution is the revenge. They thought you'd fall apart. They thought you'd beg for closure. They thought you'd chase them like the broken ones before you. But instead, you stopped explaining. You started evolving. You see, most people fear betrayal because they think it leaves them empty. But Jung saw the truth. Betrayal doesn't empty you. It empties your illusions. And what remains when all the lies are stripped away is the real you. The version they were never prepared to meet. But this was only step one. What comes next will make you completely untouchable. Most people respond to betrayal with noise, anger, outbursts, drama. But what they don't realize is that noise is weakness. Because every time you react, you give them proof that they still control you. And that's exactly what they want. But you chose something different. You chose silence. Because silence isn't emptiness. Silence is control. Carl Jung understood that real power isn't found in reacting to others. It's found in mastering yourself. You didn't chase explanations. You didn't beg for closure. You went inward. And that terrified them more than any argument ever could. Your silence exposed them to themselves. They could no longer hide behind their lies because you stopped playing their game. And here's the part most people never grasp. What you don't react to, you rise above. Your silence didn't mean weakness. It meant you were shifting to a level where they could no longer reach you. They wanted to pull you into their chaos, but instead, you pulled away into clarity. You started building in secret, healing in silence, strengthening where they assumed you were broken. The strongest men are not forged in the spotlight. They are forged in isolation where no one claps, where no one watches. And when you return, you no longer speak to defend yourself. You walk, and your presence explains everything they need to know. But we're just getting started. Because this next Jungian principle is where 99% of people fail. This is where most people lose everything. After betrayal, they become addicted to fighting the past. They argue, explain, and obsess over being understood by the very people who shattered them. But Carl Jung revealed a truth most never hear: what you fight weakens you. What you're in harmony with strengthens you. They wanted you trapped in endless conflict, locked in emotional warfare. But you broke that pattern. You didn't fight the betrayal. You aligned with it. You stopped trying to undo the damage, and instead, you turned it into fuel. That's where real power lives. You stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What am I being prepared for?" That shift changes everything. Because the moment you stop fighting the wound, you start extracting wisdom from it. And that wisdom turns you into something they can't control, can't manipulate, and can't destroy. You evolved into someone who no longer plays by emotional rules. While they drown in drama, you operate in strategy. While they react, you calculate. While they try to win arguments, you build empires. You don't need their validation because you've built something far more dangerous: self-possession. You no longer chase peace from people who live in conflict. You carry peace that cannot be shaken. And that's exactly where your enemies start to fear you the most. But what I'm about to reveal next is the psychological key that unlocks your next evolution. Stay with me. Now we enter the part they never expected. Your transformation didn't happen in public. It happened in private. While they watched for signs of your collapse, you went silent. While they waited for you to break, you were quietly rebuilding. And here's where Carl Jung's most dangerous truth comes alive. Metamorphosis happens in darkness. The caterpillar doesn't grow wings under applause. It dissolves in isolation unseen. That was you. You weren't disappearing. You were disintegrating into something entirely new. You weren't collapsing. You were restructuring. They thought they'd buried you. But you weren't buried. You were planted. In the dark, you faced yourself. You confronted everything you used to avoid. The rage, the grief, the disappointment, the guilt. And instead of running from it, you absorbed it. You let it shape you. That's why most people never rise, because they run from the darkness that was designed to make them powerful. But you stayed. You suffered consciously. You didn't ask for comfort. You asked for clarity. You let the fire strip away every false identity you once wore. And now, you're no longer who they remember. You've become unrecognizable. Because they were prepared to fight the old you. They have no defense against the version of you that was forged in silence. But there's still one thing that makes this transformation absolutely irreversible. And that's what I'm about to reveal next. This is the shift that separates those who rise from those who stay broken. Most people think their pain was a mistake. They spend years trying to undo it, erase it, pretend it never happened. But Carl Jung revealed the brutal truth. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Your pain wasn't random. It was your initiation. Every sleepless night, every tear, every moment you thought you were losing your mind wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Because suffering doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to strip you of who you are not. You thought you were being broken. In reality, you were being introduced to the parts of yourself that only reveal themselves under pressure. The version of you that can endure that can carry weight. Others run from that, can hold power without needing validation. That's what the pain was building. You weren't collapsing. You were being carved into something rare. Most people stay victims because they believe their suffering stole something from them. You've learned the truth. Your suffering gave you access to a depth few people will ever touch. And now you carry a strength that feels unnatural to those who've never faced themselves. That's why your enemies feel uneasy around you now, not because of what you say, but because of what you've become. But we're not done yet, because what happens next is where your evolution becomes unstoppable. Now you've reached the level that most people will never touch. This is where your silence starts to terrify them, not because you've threatened them, not because you've retaliated, but because they can feel something they can't explain. Carl Jung said it best: your enemies aren't afraid of your anger, they're afraid of your stillness. Because stillness signals control, it signals mastery. While they create chaos, spread rumors, and manipulate, you've stopped playing their game entirely. And that's what haunts them. You see, most people only understand power when it's loud. They expect rage, shouting breakdowns. But true power doesn't need volume. It operates in quiet authority. You no longer respond to their bait. You don't explain yourself. You don't chase their approval. You've become unreadable. And what they can't read, they can't control. That's why they panic. Because as long as they could predict your reactions, they felt superior. But your silence robbed them of that illusion. Now every time they look at you, they're forced to confront the one thing they've been running from their entire lives: their own weakness. You've outgrown the battlefield they tried to trap you on. And here's the truth: they'll never admit they don't fear what you'll do. They fear what you've already become. But the most dangerous shift is still coming. And once you apply this next principle, you'll become completely untouchable. Now you're about to understand why your enemies keep losing even after the betrayal. Because they're still trapped inside the story where they hurt you. They replay it, cling to it, define themselves by it. But you kept writing. They're stuck in chapter 1. You've already written chapter 20. That's why they don't recognize you anymore. The version of you that existed when they betrayed you no longer exists. You didn't survive them. You transcended them. And that's the part they'll never understand. Betrayal didn't paralyze you. It forced you into evolution. Carl Jung revealed that true transformation doesn't come from being right or wrong. It comes from transcending both. You stop playing their game entirely. You no longer care who was right. You care about who you've become. That's why you're untouchable now. Because they can't manipulate someone who doesn't need their validation. They can't guilt someone who no longer seeks their forgiveness. You are no longer driven by proving anything to anyone. You're driven by alignment, by purpose, by mission. And that makes you unstoppable. They thought the betrayal would define your story, but it only defined their limits. You've evolved into something they never expected: sovereign, focused, and untouchable. But there's one final shift that seals this transformation. And once you understand it, you'll realize why nothing and no one can ever break you again. Here's the truth they never saw coming. What makes you dangerous now isn't just what you've survived. It's the unshakable calm you carry after the storm. Carl Jung said the most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a peace that cannot be disturbed. You've earned that peace. Not because life became easier, but because you became stronger. They expected you to be bitter, to stay broken, to spiral into chaos. But you've done something far more terrifying. You've stabilized. You've built an inner foundation they can't shake. While they drown in their emotional storms, you've learned how to walk on water. While they react, you observe. While they seek control, you've mastered detachment. You no longer need their approval, explanation, or apology. You carry a calm that confuses them because they've never known anyone who could take pain and convert it into clarity. That's your real power now. You've become so grounded that nothing they do can pull you back into their drama. Their games don't work anymore because you've rewritten the rules. They wanted you trapped in emotional warfare, but you built something untouchable: inner sovereignty. You own your mind. You own your emotions. And once a man owns himself, no one owns him ever again. But there's one last psychological principle that makes your evolution irreversible, and I'm about to reveal it. This final shift is where your enemies completely lose control, because now you've stepped into a space very few ever reach. You no longer need revenge. You don't chase it. You don't fantasize about it. You've outgrown it. Carl Jung revealed the truth most people can't handle. Sanity isn't what keeps people safe. It's often their prison. The sane response to betrayal is rage. The predictable response is retaliation. But you chose the insane path: growth, elevation, transcendence. And that's what drives them mad. They can't comprehend how someone they tried to break could rise higher without needing to strike back. They expected your downfall to fuel their ego, but instead, your existence became the revenge. You don't have to destroy them. Your evolution already did. Every time they see you thriving, calm, focused, and detached from the narrative they tried to trap you in, they feel smaller, because you've become living proof that they had no power over you. The betrayal they thought would define you became the fuel that refined you. And now, you walk with a kind of quiet dominance that needs no explanation. You don't announce your strength. You embody it. They feel it without you saying a word. And that silent authority, that's the final victory. You didn't just heal. You became untouchable. But stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal next will expose the psychological secret that makes you permanently unstoppable. This final shift is where your enemies completely lose control, because now you've stepped into a space very few ever reach. You no longer need revenge. You don't chase it. You don't fantasize about it. You've outgrown it. Carl Jung revealed the truth most people can't handle. Sanity isn't what keeps people safe. It's often their prison. The sane response to betrayal is rage. The predictable response is retaliation. But you chose the insane path: growth, elevation, transcendence. And that's what drives them mad. They can't comprehend how someone they tried to break could rise higher without needing to strike back. They expected your downfall to fuel their ego, but instead, your existence became the revenge. You don't have to destroy them. Your evolution already did. Every time they see you thriving, calm, focused, and detached from the narrative they tried to trap you in, they feel smaller, because you've become living proof that they had no power over you. The betrayal they thought would define you became the fuel that refined you. And now you walk with a kind of quiet dominance that needs no explanation. You don't announce your strength. You embody it. They feel it without you saying a word. And that silent authority, that's the final victory. You didn't just heal, you became untouchable. But stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal next will expose the psychological secret that makes you permanently unstoppable. Now you're operating on a level where they can't even follow, because you've stopped reacting to life based on right and wrong. You've stepped into something far more dangerous: personal alignment. Carl Jung taught that the mind doesn't swing between right and wrong, it swings between sense and nonsense. And most people live trapped in nonsense. They obsess over who was right, who was wrong, who owes who an apology. But you don't play that game anymore. You've realized that the endless debate is nothing but emotional quicksand. Every second spent arguing is energy stolen from your evolution. And that's why they can't handle who you've become. You stopped seeking justice. You started seeking growth. You stopped chasing explanations. You started building clarity. They expected you to stay trapped inside the same story as them, but you walked away and wrote a different story entirely. And now, they no longer recognize you, because you're no longer playing their emotional chessboard. While they argue over pawns, you've already left the game. That's what real power looks like. Quiet, focused, unreadable. They can't figure you out because you're not trapped in the same emotional loops they are. You've transcended the story where they had power. And once you break free from their narrative, you become permanently untouchable. But the final secret that locks in your invincibility, that's what I'm about to show you next. This is where your evolution becomes permanent. Because while they tried to break your confidence, they could never touch your purpose. Carl Jung said he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And that's what makes you unstoppable. They attacked your reputation. They attacked your emotions. They attacked your circumstances. But your why, that was untouchable. Your purpose doesn't need their approval. Your mission doesn't need their permission. That's why you kept rising while they kept watching. They thought breaking your routine would break your identity. But they never understood you weren't fueled by comfort. You were fueled by calling. Every setback they designed became another layer of resilience. Every betrayal they orchestrated became another reason you refused to quit. While they were busy creating obstacles, you were converting every obstacle into momentum. They expected you to collapse under pressure, but you trained under pressure. You mastered pain. You weaponized it. They thought they were writing your ending, but you turned it into your beginning. Your purpose gave you the kind of power that silence can't hide and noise can't shake. And that's the moment your enemies lose for good. Because when a man operates from purpose, he becomes a force no one can block. They can't outwork you. They can't outlast you. And they'll never understand how you turn betrayal into fuel. But now comes the final shift, the truth that makes your transformation irreversible. This is where everything comes full circle. Because while they were busy rehearsing your past, you've already stepped into a future they can't even imagine. Carl Jung said it best, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And that's exactly what you've done. They thought they were defining your identity when they hurt you, but they only wrote the first page. You took the pen. You wrote the chapters they never saw coming. That's why they're still trapped in chapter 1, stuck in the version of you they broke. But you kept evolving. You kept expanding. You kept becoming. And now they no longer recognize who you are. You've become unrecognizable not because you're hiding, but because you've outgrown every label they tried to place on you. They see your name, but no longer see the man they thought they could control. That's the real revenge, not destruction, but elevation. You didn't destroy them. You surpassed them. You didn't shrink under the weight of betrayal. You rose because of it. The person who stands here now was forged in silence, strengthened by pain, and elevated through self-mastery. You are no longer playing by their rules. You are writing rules they can't even comprehend, and that is why they will never catch you again. But there's still one final truth that locks your transformation into permanent dominance. And that's what comes next. Now you're about to understand why your enemies can never recover from underestimating you. Because while they were busy calculating your failure, they forgot one thing you never needed their permission to rebuild. The pain they delivered wasn't your death sentence. It was your rebirth. And here's where Carl Jung's most dangerous truth cuts through: you were never destroyed. You were refined. Every setback they created became a lesson you absorbed. Every insult became fuel you converted. Every silent night became a forge where your new identity was built. And now, they see the results of a process they never imagined you could survive. They thought they broke you, but all they did was activate the version of you that thrives in solitude, that doesn't crumble under pressure, and that no longer reacts to their games. You didn't climb back to prove them wrong. You climbed because you chose evolution over ego. And that's why you're untouchable now. They can't access you emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. They have no leverage left. You became dangerous not because you fought harder, but because you mastered stillness while they drowned in noise. You don't chase revenge. You embody power. Your silence speaks louder than any retaliation ever could. And now, with this final evolution, you've become something their betrayal was never built to handle completely free. But there's one last secret that explains why you'll never be touched again. And that's what I'll reveal next. Here's the secret that makes your transformation irreversible. You no longer operate from emotion. You move from principle. Carl Jung understood this better than anyone. The man who lives by purpose, not impulse, becomes impossible to break. They tried to control you by provoking reactions, but you've cut the strings they used to pull. They no longer have access to your emotions, your mind, or your energy. You've detached completely. And in that detachment, you've gained ultimate control. Most people live like puppets chained to approval, addicted to attention, enslaved by validation. But you've reached the rarest level, full sovereignty. You don't explain. You don't negotiate. You don't perform. You simply exist as who you've become. And that existence alone disturbs them, because they can't manipulate someone who no longer needs anything from them. They can't bait someone who no longer reacts. They can't compete with someone who's not playing the game anymore. You've stepped into psychological invisibility, and that's the highest form of power. While they watch, while they talk, while they stay trapped in the narrative they built, you've quietly exited the entire system. You've elevated beyond the story. You no longer seek victory over them, you've achieved victory over yourself. And that victory is permanent. But stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal next is the final law that makes you untouchable for life. This is where the game ends for them and begins for you. Because what they never understood, and what Carl Jung revealed, is that true freedom isn't found in revenge. It's found in resurrection. You didn't recover from the betrayal. You were reborn through it. Every person who tried to break you was writing their final chapter while you were quietly building your first. They expected you to survive. They never expected you to evolve. And now, your existence alone becomes the revenge they can't escape. Every move you make in silence screams louder than anything they ever said about you. Every success you build reminds them of the power they tried to destroy. But they never touched your why. And that's why they lost. They can't stop a man driven by something larger than validation. They can't break a man who doesn't need their approval. They thought their betrayal would mark your ending. It became your beginning. And every time they see you rise, they are forced to relive the moment they failed to stop you. That is the weight they carry. That is the consequence of underestimating someone who learns how to weaponize pain. And now, while they're still trapped in their old version of you, you've stepped into a version of yourself they'll never have access to again. But there's one final truth that makes this transformation absolute. And that's what comes next. Here's the final truth they will never escape. You didn't just survive them. You transcended them. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That's the secret they never saw coming. They thought they were writing your identity. They thought the betrayal would define you forever. But they were wrong. The version of you that existed when they hurt you no longer exists. That version died the moment you faced your pain instead of running from it. And what stands here now? A man entirely reborn. You carry no bitterness, no desperation, no hunger for their approval. You've become untouchable, not because you fought harder, but because you outgrew the battlefield entirely. They live trapped inside the memory of who you were. You live fully inside who you've become. They carry the weight of guilt, of regret, of unresolved weakness. You carry nothing but clarity. And now, your existence itself is proof that no betrayal, no wound, no attempt to destroy you was ever enough to stop your evolution. You've become the living evidence that the ones who tried to break you were nothing more than fuel for your transformation. They'll keep revisiting the past. You've moved so far ahead, They can't even see you anymore. That is your final victory. That is the permanent consequence of underestimating someone who learns how to own their pain. And now, you walk forward as someone they will never touch again. There's one final layer you must understand. Betrayal didn't just reveal your strength, it exposed their weakness. You see, they never truly had power over you. They only had the illusion of power. And that illusion shattered the moment you stopped needing anything from them. Carl Jung revealed that most people aren't fighting you. They're fighting their own projections of you. That's why they lashed out. That's why they tried to break you. Because your very existence forced them to face parts of themselves they've spent their entire lives avoiding. They weren't threatened by your mistakes. They were threatened by your potential. And when they couldn't control that potential, they tried to destroy it. But what they failed to realize is simple: you don't break a man by betraying him. You break a man when you convince him to betray himself. And you refused. You didn't collapse into self-doubt. You didn't surrender your identity. You didn't negotiate your worth. Instead, you let the pain sharpen you. You stood in the fire long enough to become fire. And now, they're left haunted by the simple fact that you survived what was meant to destroy you. That's why your silence echoes louder than their noise. That's why your peace disturbs their chaos. You've become untouchable not because you avoided pain, but because you owned it. And now every step you take forward becomes a reminder of the battle they lost the moment you chose evolution. This is the final evolution they will never understand. You no longer carry the weight of what they did. You've detached from the story they tried to trap you in. Carl Jung called this individuation the moment you become fully integrated, fully whole. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped needing anything outside of yourself. They wanted you forever tied to the betrayal. But now, you don't even recognize that version of you anymore. That man who was betrayed no longer exists. He was burned away during the process of your awakening. And in his place stands something far more dangerous: a man who's fully at peace. Not numb, not cold, fully present, fully clear, fully self-contained. And that's why they can't hurt you anymore. Because they were never fighting you, they were fighting their own insecurity, their own guilt, their own weakness. You simply became the mirror. And when you stopped reacting, when you stopped explaining, you took away their ability to control the reflection. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure. Your existence is the closure. Every breath you take, every step you make in your evolution becomes the loudest statement they'll ever hear. And as you walk forward into your next chapter, remember this truth: you weren't destroyed, you were rebuilt. And they were never ready for who you were always meant to become. You've now seen the truth most people spend a lifetime avoiding. Betrayal didn't break you. It introduced you to the parts of yourself you were always meant to awaken. The pain wasn't the end of your story. It was the birth of your evolution. You stopped chasing explanations. You stopped needing closure. And in doing so, you took back everything they thought they stole. You're not trapped in who hurt you. You're living proof that what was meant to destroy you became the very force that rebuilt you. You weren't buried. You were planted. And now you rise fully sovereign, fully untouchable. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And you've made your choice. You chose mastery. You chose power. You chose freedom. If you felt this shift inside you today, subscribe right now. Share this with the one person still carrying betrayal like a weight. Let them see what happens when you stop reacting, start evolving, and finally take back your power. Because the world doesn't belong to the ones who stay broken. It belongs to those who rise after being shattered.